Hi, thank you for joining my presentation, Lasagna Gardening, the Art of Sheet Composting. My name is Claire Thorne, Extension Associate, Agriculture and Natural Resources with Central State University Extension. Today, my focus is to provide some information about lasagna gardening, or what is referred to as sheet or mulch composting. My goal today is to share how you may benefit from this style of gardening and what is involved in creating a lasagna bed. But let's talk about traditional gardening for a moment before we dig into lasagna gardening. With traditional gardening, many of us do not have the ability to work large spaces. And even if we do, we can make gardening a little easier by managing smaller garden beds. In-ground gardens require breaking ground with a tiller after removing or killing the sod. Whether you have a tiller or you rent one, it is hard on our bodies as it bounces around over uneven ground. Some soils are easier to work, but if you have hard clay, it can be quite a challenge. In a larger garden, weeding can easily frustrate the gardener, especially once the weeds get out of control and have taken root. To enhance the soil for better aeration and drainage, adding organic materials will be necessary to improve the soil structure. So if you're adding organic materials to improve soil conditions, why not use those materials to grow your plants directly? What is lasagna gardening? Maybe you have heard of it being referred to again as sheet, mulch, or cold composting. Well, it's not a garden made of pasta. But think about the layering effect of lasagna. Using organic materials, you create a garden bed layered with food scraps, grass clippings, straws, or whatever materials you have available. It allows you to create a garden space with minimal effort. It's built again out of organic matter on top of the soil, so there's no need to break ground, so no tilling is required. This compost material is full of nutrients. The bed will break down, creating excellent crumbling soil and moisture retentive soil. Fewer weeds get established since the first layer above the ground is either paper or cardboard. In any plant you want to grow, whether it's a vegetable, herb, or flower, it'll thrive in a fairly weed-free environment. So if the work is made easier, why wouldn't you consider creating a lasagna bed? Again, no digging, no tilling. You use scraps of newspaper, kitchen and yard waste, and turn that into great soil. It sets up relatively in a very short time. You'll have a raised bed with soil that warms up sooner, and that will allow you to extend the growing season. And it is an efficient, easy method for making a new garden. And as one ages, this style of gardening makes above ground gardening very nice. So how does it work? Instead of composting the materials in a compost bin until they turn into soil, then have to move it to your garden beds, with a lasagna gardening, you layer these materials right into the garden bed. These different materials are used to create the many layers like lasagna. These materials will begin to compost at the same time that you're beginning to plant in the top layer of the new bed. Seeds or transplants, you can plant them the same day if you want. That would be, of course, if you're creating your bed in the spring. But save time and effort by creating a garden with the materials you have. Let's continue to see what lasagna gardening is about. A reference you might like to have on hand is Patricia Lanza's book, Lasagna Gardening, a new layering system for bountiful gardens. No digging, no tilling, no weeding, no kidding. She captures the essence of lasagna gardening in great detail, but simply put, to make a lasagna garden, you decide the location of that garden, start laying organic material, hence the term lasagna garden. The layers will break down over time and you are left with a nutrient-rich, fluffy soil in which to grow your flower, herbs, and vegetables. The best way to build a lasagna garden is to alternate layers of brown, which are carbon-rich materials, with green, nitrogen-rich materials. We'll talk about greens and browns in the upcoming slides. So let's get started. Beginning the process. You want to gather your materials to have them ready to build your bed, which will make the task of building the bed go faster. As you create your layers, it is important to moisten them to help with the decomposition process of turning it into the rich soil. So you'll be happy you're reviewing my presentation now that we're in the fall season. Fall is a great time to create a lasagna garden with all the abundant supplies available, such as the fallen leaves, plants which are no longer producing, and with overall garden cleanup. Just be certain not to add any diseased plants. As a side note, a lasagna bed can be created any time of the year. So if you get inspired, it's just nice to have the fall supplies to make it easier. But with creating a bed in the fall and over winter, the materials will begin to break down, as well as allowing the manure to age further. And you should expect settling of the materials. I really like this picture defining the layers, the greens and the browns. So, are you ready to talk about those browns and greens? Here we go. So, the important part is so that decomposition can take place is you need to have materials that are carbon-based or nitrogen-based. The easiest ways to remember: browns are your carbons and greens are your nitrogen. So for example, your nitrogen-rich materials: fresh mown grass clippings, coffee grounds, pulled weeds, aged manure, which can be horse, sheep, llama, cow, or rabbit, kitchen scraps, peelings, rinds, fruit skins. Your carbon-rich materials, or your browns, are your leaves, your pine needles, twigs, straw, newspaper, sawdust, fine bark. The carbon layer adds the fluff to your garden bed, so there are air pockets that allow good bacteria to flourish. If your layers get too compressed or too wet, there'll be too little air, and you'll have layers that smell sour. Not good. Layers of twiggy stuff, like small branches and twigs, are good for your lasagna layers. One thing to keep in mind: you don't want to have too much carbon or too much nitrogen. You want about equal portions. So it's a guesstimate. Say, for example, if you're putting down a 5-gallon bucket of nitrogen, say grass clippings, then you would know to add a 5-gallon bucket of carbon-rich nutrients, such as your leaves. I really like this slide since it provides a nice visual image to remember the layering effect. Carbon, nitrogen, carbon, nitrogen. Once you have again placed that cardboard or newspaper directly on the ground for your grass and weed suppression. Determining what can be used in the layering process. This list gives a better idea of what you may have on hand. Each bed is unique and no two beds are the same. So again, nitrogen includes your manures, your grass clippings, fruit and vegetable scraps, coffee grounds, tea bags, and leaves. Tea leaves, that is. Your carbon is compost, newspaper, cardboard, leaves, pine needles, peat moss, small branches, or twigs. Now this is an example, a little more detail. This chart was created by Five Rivers Metro Parks. And we use this method similar to when I was partnering with Five Rivers at the Dayton Veterans Administration. And as you can see, this bed is built 42 to 45 inches. So, as with any gardening, one of the most important steps is selecting a sunny spot with a nearby water source. Once you have your site selected, place the cardboard or newspaper directly over the grass and the ground. Sometimes marking the outline of the bed is helpful, but it's not necessary. Be certain to water this layer to hold it in place before you add the first layer of nitrogen. Remember, your cardboard is carbon. To help demonstrate creating a lasagna bed, I'm using a few pictures from a project done, as I mentioned, at the Dayton VA. This was around 2011, 2012. Master Gardener volunteers, VA staff, VA participants, and myself receive instructions from Lucy Beachdale, a colleague from Five Rivers Metro Parks, who has since moved on to another endeavor. Our supplies included leaf compost, manure, hay, straw, coffee grinds to build this lasagna bed. After placing the cardboard, again, that's your carbon, we began layering with aged manure, nitrogen, leaf compost, carbon, grass clippings, nitrogen, straw, carbon, and coffee grounds, nitrogen. Again, make sure between your layers you're adding water. Here you see Lucy adding the straw while Donna spreads it over the entire bed. In the background is John, who's one of the veterans who participated with our group. Gene is looking to where he can assist. This is a close-up at the nearly finished bed that we created. And trying to use all the organic materials. Gene is raking to tidy up the area. And Gene knows that the lasagna bed will settle, so he's wanting to leave nothing to waste. To kickstart the growth and health of the plants, you could add a little fertilizer if you're creating your bed in the spring. Once you have the bed built get ready to plant. Here, as you see in this slide from West Virginia University, they've added their transplants directly into the bed that they've created. These pictures show the planting process on the left and a flourishing squash bed on the right. Again, no two beds are alike. As with gardening, all gardeners have their preferences, and many may not like the unkept look to a lasagna bed. So these pictures show how you can still layer within a bordered or framed structure. Poultry netting was used in the lower picture on the right. Perhaps layering to the top of the netting would be ideal so the fence frame does not impede with your access for planting or working the garden. Poultry netting comes in 1, 2, 3, and 4-foot heights, which would create an appropriate garden bed depth. So just a few last reminders and tips to know you don't have to follow a recipe or instructions for success. Cardboard and newspaper make excellent bottom layers to smother the grass and weeds. You want to water that bottom layer to hold it in place, to encourage decomposition. It also provides a dark, moist environment to attract earthworms that will soon begin to loosen the soil as they tunnel through it. Your brown and green layers should be about equal, but absolute precision is not crucial. The results of your laying process can vary from 2-foot to 4-foot high beds, which again will shrink down in a few weeks. Rules for successful lasagna gardening are similar to any form of composting. The materials must be slightly moist to encourage that decomposition, but not so wet that they get stagnant. What's important to remember is your workload has been decreased while the benefits have increased. For these reasons listed on this screen, why not try lasagna gardening? Higher yields in smaller space, good soil aeration, better soil drainage, reduces the risk of soil compaction, allows for strong, healthy root systems. Fewer weeds and pest problems, you can extend your growing season. Most of all, in my mind, easier on your back and ideal for mobility challenged or aging gardeners. Besides Patricia Lanza's book, a number of websites offer information on lasagna gardening or sheet composting. These are a few that I've used in compiling my presentation. I would recommend reviewing some of them to help you decide what may work for you. One word of suggestion is to look at research-based information on websites that end in .gov, .gov, or .edu. Keep in mind that .coms, .orgs may be presenting biased information or trying to sell a product, but with all your web searches, weigh the good information along with your research. I would like to thank you for viewing my presentation on lasagna gardening, and I hope you have found inspiration in developing your gardening skills. My contact information is listed on the screen should you have any questions or would like to reach out to me. And I have one more slide that's going to follow up, which includes Central State University's non-discriminatory policy. Since Central State University is an 1890 land-grant university, we receive state and federal funding to support our reaching our audiences. So we supply this statement for all to be aware of our non-discrimination policies. Thank you again, and happy gardening.